The V8 engine is not dead yet, but on January 1st, 2025, the Australian government will introduce a new Vehicle Efficiency Standard, or NVES, which could mean that manufacturers are fined for having very high emission vehicles on the Australian market. This in turn means that the V8 engine that we know and love could meet its demise very soon, unless manufacturers can make them a lot better for the environment. Just look at Toyota, for example. It's axing the 4.5-litre turbo diesel V8 engine found in its 70 series Land Cruiser, and even Mercedes-AMG is going away from its 4-litre V8 in favour of small hybrid turbo 4-cylinders. But that brings me today to this car, the 2024 Nissan Patrol. Apart from the Toyota 70 series Land Cruiser, this is one of the cheapest ways to get into a V8 SUV in the Australian market. It's been subtly updated for 2024, including new infotainment. But is it still a good buy in 2024? Or would you rather go for something like a Toyota Land Cruiser 300 series? Well, in today's video, we're going to find out. Before we get started, make sure you like and subscribe to Chasing Cars. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. So what exact Patrol do we have on test today? Well, this car right behind me is a Ti-L, which is the highest grade apart from the Warrior Off-Road Edition that you can also purchase. This car is priced at $101,600 before on-road costs, or about $110,000 drive away. That's pretty expensive, but it is significantly cheaper than a Sahara Land Cruiser 300 series that's around $145,000 drive away. That's a lot of money. So this Ti-L grade adds a few extra things over the base Ti, such as a powered sunroof, memory seats, and you've also got a 7-seat setup in this car rather than the 8-seat for the regular Ti base model. You also get a powered tailgate for the Ti-L, as well as roof rails, which is always handy. Now, how is this car actually selling in Australia this year? Well, so far in 2024, they've sold around 4,000 Nissan Patrols, which is about half what Toyota's doing with the Land Cruiser 300 series. They've done over 8,000 sales so far for that 300 series in Australia. So the Patrol is a little bit behind in terms of the sales race here in Australia, but it should get an update pretty soon. So I thought I'd do a special little segment on the engine of this Patrol. It is one of the most special parts of this vehicle. This is a 5.6-litre naturally aspirated V8 engine. It's got double overhead cams, variable valve timing. It's pretty standard in 2024, but this engine produces really good outputs, 298 kilowatts of power and 560 newton meters of torque. So it is a pretty punchy beast of a thing, and you don't see that sort of engine too much in today's vehicles. So this engine weighs in at 225 kilograms, but that's only 7.8% of this entire mass of this Nissan Patrol. It's about 2,800 kilograms curb weight. It's very heavy, but that engine is a serious piece of machinery. So this big beast of a V8 is connected to a full-time four-wheel drive system, and it's fed by a 140-litre fuel tank. You'll need 95 octane or higher to run this engine, so I can't see that being too cheap. And in terms of emissions, it puts out 330 grams of CO2 per kilometre, which is significantly more than a lot of other cars in the market and more than a Land Cruiser 300 series. Wow. So what are my first impressions inside the cabin of the Nissan Patrol Ti-L? Well, there's a lot going on, so there's a lot to talk about. But the first things is, how does it feel in terms of cabin materials? Material choice is actually rather soft all around the place. It seems to be a lot of like leather and fake leather right across the dash. And these seats are quite comfortable too, these leather upholstered seats. They are lacking a little bit of side bolstering. You do sort of slip out of them a bit when you're driving. These are electric seats for the front. They're also cooled and heated as well, which is pretty cool. And they've also got a memory function for the Ti-L specifically. Now, the steering wheel is pretty good. It's nicely upholstered in leather. It's got quite a few buttons on there. It works pretty well, although the buttons don't correspond to the little instrument cluster, but we will get to that in a second. In terms of the rest of the feel, like everything is just nice and soft. It does feel premium in here, but it should. It's over $100,000. Now, in terms of other material choices, they've got this strange sort of like timber, sort of plastic material. I'm not actually sure what it's called. It reminds me of sort of high-spec Commodores from the 1990s and also Mercedes. They had a sort of similar thing going on. All in all, it does feel okay, but as I'm about to discuss, it's quite a dated cabin. Now, when I say dated, I mean the buttons on the steering wheel are a little bit dated. This whole sort of center cluster here is very dated too, which is a bit of a shame, but I mean, this car will get updated very soon. The new Y63 is probably only a year or two away, and it'll look nothing like this. So if you can put up with it, then it's fine. Now, speaking about technology in the Nissan Patrol, this gets a new 10.1-inch touchscreen that runs wireless and wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Look, I think that because the seating position is so high, you're actually looking down at the screen rather than sort of at it. It's a bit too low for my personal preferences, but the system itself works pretty well. It's pretty fast. It doesn't have a lot of functionality to it. I mean, I just used it for Apple CarPlay and that was fine. It's nice and crisp and clear, but it sort of looks like an aftermarket unit rather than a Nissan or another brand product. As for the instrument cluster, well, it's quite old school. There's an analog dial on one side for the revs, analog dial on the other side for your speed, and a little tiny screen in the middle, but it doesn't display digital speed. So you've only got your fuel economy on there and you don't have everything else that most of these modern cars have in 2024. It's very old school. You've even got old school dials for the temperature of the engine, oil temp, and your fuel as well is all analog. Some people will love that, some people won't. I do kind of like the fact that you can also use these little buttons that are up the top of each side of the cluster to do your trip resets, adjust the brightness of the gauge cluster, and also go through your screens as well. So it's just a little bit different to what I'm used to in more modern cars. Yes, this is a 2024 model, but it just doesn't feel like it. Now, in terms of practicality, this is where the Patrol really shines. There's a lot going on in terms of where you can store stuff. In the center here, you've got a little compartment for your wallet or your keys, etc. You've got a pretty awesome glove box in there. You've got two cup holders in the center. You've also got a strange but quite handy mobile phone charger that's hidden away underneath a little trapdoor. In the center here, you have a cooler box, so you could put some soft drinks or something in there if you wanted to. That's really handy. You don't get that in every car. And in terms of other features, you've got pretty deep door bins that could fit a pretty sizable, probably a litre water bottle in each side. You've also got a sunglass holder up the top as well. So there's a lot going on in the front seat, but it's a pretty good package. Again, I sound like a broken record, but it's just still a little bit too dated for my preferences. So most importantly, what is the second row of seating like in the Nissan Patrol? Well, I'm really comfortable here. These seats are really soft, really sort of supportive. They've got good headrests. In terms of room, there's heaps of knee room, stacks of toe room, and plenty of headroom as well. So even if you had a couple of adults back here, you're going out for a day trip or so, you're going to be very comfortable in the back seat of the Patrol. Let's just say that straight away. Now, in terms of features back here, there's a fold-down armrest just here. It's got a pretty flimsy two cup holders that fold out just there. That folds away nicely. In the center, there's two USB-A ports, one on each side, so the kids can charge their iPads or whatever needs to happen. Now, also, there is a fan speed here, as well as a switch for the cooler. This is a pretty cool feature that you can actually open the cooler either way, so you can get your soft drinks out of the cooler and the driver doesn't have to do so. Big win. Now, in terms of other features back here, we've just got magazine pockets, pretty standard on the back of the two front seats. You've got little air vents here on the side. And back in the third row, I'm not going to try and get in there. That's not going to be a pleasant experience. However, you do get air vents in the back too, plus 4 cup holders, 2 on each side. So it's certainly built for families, built for touring, built for comfort. And I think it really excels in those areas. So round the back of the Nissan Patrol Ti-L, just pop that and the powered tailgate opens up nice and slowly. Inside you get 467 litres of boot space with all the seats upright. That is including the third row. However, if you put all the seats down, you get over 2,000 litres of storage space. So this is a very practical thing indeed. Inside the boot, you get a couple of cool features such as 2 cup holders on either side for the third row. You get a little nook in the center here, and underneath is a full-size spare tire. So that's really handy. It should be the case for a vehicle like this, especially if you're off-roading. You'll need that sort of tire to back you up just in case you get a puncture. And also in the back, can't forget to note this, you have a 12-volt socket just here. Perfect if you wanted to power a fridge or something. Really good if you're going camping. A lot of these cars are used for that, so that's really cool. So let's talk a little bit now about running costs. The Nissan Patrol behind me is covered by a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty. In terms of servicing, the Nissan Patrol will cost $2,717 over 5 years as part of Nissan's service package. Servicing will need to take place every 10,000 kilometres or 12 months, whichever occurs first. As for fuel efficiency, the Nissan Patrol has an official claim of 14.4 litres per 100 kilometres combined, which is pretty thirsty, but in the real world, we're seeing about 12.9 over about 220 kilometres travelled. However, if you're doing a lot of off-roading, you're probably going to see up to 15, 16 or 17 litres per 100, and I really hate to think what it's going to be when you're towing a big caravan behind you. We're seeing on the forums as much as 22 litres per 100 kilometres on a towing route. So that's crazy to think about, and a lot higher than some of its key competitors. So what's it like to drive the 2024 Nissan Patrol? Well, the first thing I noticed when I got into this car for the very first time was the V8 engine. It is a real hallmark of this car. I guess it's one of the reasons why a lot of people buy a Patrol. It's got that 5.6-litre naturally aspirated engine, 298 kilowatts, 560 newton meters. It's a serious bit of kit. That's equating to about 400 horsepower. And I mean, this car does need it. It is heavy. This is a 2,800 kilogram SUV, and it's, you know, just over 5 meters long. It is a bit of a beast, this thing. And to drive around the city, it's generally quite good. It's very comfortable. It's very softly sprung. The seating position is a little bit too high for my liking. You sort of feel like you're driving on top of the car rather than in it, which is just a bit different. You do get used to that with time. Around town, I was doing a lot of commuting with this car. It is quite hard to park, which I didn't really think to be a problem. My space at home isn't very big, but it's just so wide as well, and it just feels like a dominant force on the road. And I guess for a lot of people, that's something that you'd really love. You'd love to have that feeling of not being powerful on the road, but just feeling secure and safe. Now, once you take the Patrol out on the highway, it just gets better, the experience. The engine just settles nicely, it's very quiet, and the ride is really good. This is a car that's definitely set up for touring and for doing long highway stints with ease. And I think that's where it's really strong. And when you are on the highway, you do seem to get a lot less of the engine running high in the RPMs. It drops back. This car has a 7-speed torque converter automatic transmission, and it does sort of definitely settles into a rhythm there, which is great. Now, this Patrol definitely does feel its weight, and I think that's one of its downsides. It just really sort of boats its way through corners, sort of heaving as it goes around, which can be a little bit unsettling. You do have to be really careful when you're driving this car. I was driving through the Upper Blue Mountains just during the week, and I found that when you came down to a really sharp sort of corner, you really had to slow down. You really had to make sure that you were doing it nice and slowly, because it's just, there's so much body roll. But again, this isn't a sports car. This is a large SUV for families and touring, and I think in that regard it's really good. Now, I did have the chance to take this on some trails as well this week. It's an important part of the Patrol. A lot of people buy these to go off-road, and while I'm no four-wheel drive expert, I certainly had a good time in this car. I did have a bit of a play around with the drive control down below. You can go from on-road to sand to mud, and there's a few different options there. I actually, quite mistakenly, I just had it in on-road mode, and I did the trail with ease. It just walked over the whole lot, even some really steep climbs, some challenging sections, and it did it all in four-wheel drive high in just automatic mode. It was just amazing. So I can see why there's that appeal for this sort of vehicle in 2024. Now, one of the downsides with the Nissan Patrol, I guess, is even though it's got a V8 engine and that's all good and it sounds good and it's powerful, it's also really quite inefficient. At the moment, we've got it reading 15.6 litres per 100 kilometres. Over about 200 kilometres of driving during the week, I got down to 12.9. That was a mix of highway, on-road and off-road. So it was a pretty good mix, I think. 12.9 is not too bad, but the thing I really worry about is that if you're towing a trailer or a caravan or even a boat, you're going to see really high figures in terms of the fuel economy. I've had friends and also looked on the forums and seen that people are getting 20 to 22 litres per 100 kilometres when they're towing, which is just It's just remarkable. I just don't know how. It's just crazy, that sort of fuel usage. And I know this car has a 140-litre fuel tank, but it really, really needs it, you know, to get decent range out of the thing. So having a bit of a look now at safety, how it works on the road, and also its NCAP rating. Well, to start with the NCAP stuff, it's actually currently unrated, this car, but it does have a fair few airbags on board. It's got AEB, it's got blind spot monitoring, which I think has sort of been added as a bit of a last minute thing. It's sort of been tacked on here to the door. It looks a little bit cheap and a little bit like it wasn't meant to have it in the first place, which makes sense because this isn't a new car. But it is handy to have that blind spot. It is a big car, this, and it's good to be able to see around and also be alerted when there's cars nearby. Now, this car also has lane guidance, but it won't sort of tug at the wheel. It doesn't have that capability. It just simply beeps if you go off center, offline, and out of your lane, which I think is pretty good. But like one of its main competitors, the Land Cruiser 300 series, is certainly a more safety assist systems are featured on the Land Cruiser 300 series. But don't worry too much, because there is a new Patrol coming, the Y63. It'll probably be here in the next year or two. It probably won't have a V8, but in saying that, it will probably have a lot more safety. So all in all, I've had a pretty comfortable week living with this big beast that is the Nissan Patrol. It's certainly comfortable. It's got that V8 charm and character, and it's a good thing to drive around town. It's a little bit too big, but it's totally doable. And while it doesn't have all the safety assist systems and it is pretty thirsty, it's still a vehicle that I would recommend if you are going to do some touring or driving around Australia, or you just want a big car for your whole family and you've got the money too. This is not a cheap car. Over $100,000. It's not a cheap car, but if you've got the cash, it's a pretty good option. But I'm not sure it's any better than a Toyota Land Cruiser 300 series. So what are my final thoughts on the Nissan Patrol for 2024 after a week-long test? Well, what I really liked was that V8 engine. You just can't beat it. The sound, the torque, the power, it's all there. It's very emotive, and I just love that in a car. It's also a practical, spacious, and comfortable large SUV. And when you compare it to something like a Land Cruiser 300 series, it is a little bit cheaper as well in terms of outlay. It's going to be pretty expensive to service and pretty expensive to run, but that's what you're going to have to do if you buy one of these cars. You're just going to have to accept that fact and move on. In terms of the not so good points of the Nissan Patrol, it's mainly the interior. It's starting to look, 10 years old, which makes sense. There is a new Patrol coming, the Y63, but that won't be until 2025 or 2026. That new infotainment screen is okay, but it isn't great. I feel like it was a bit of a filler thing for Nissan to hold on to buyers instead of going for something like a Toyota Land Cruiser 300 series. But if you're after a big V8 with lots of character, lots of punch, and really comfortable on the highway, then you should be looking at a V8 Nissan Patrol. As I said in the beginning of the video, NVES is approaching very soon, and the V8 engine could be no more. So the time is now to be going out and having a look for a Nissan Patrol, investing in a Nissan Patrol, and just enjoying it, because this is a fun car to drive day to day. But I want to know what you guys have to say about the Nissan Patrol for 2024. Would you buy one over a 300 series? Well, let us know down in the comment section below. While you're there, like and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.